Well, what we have witnessed today in front of the American people is something we have not seen before. And we have said this a number of times after these hearings, but this is quite different. You're looking at a young woman named Cassidy Hutchinson, who worked directly for former Chief of Staff Mark Meadows in the Trump White House. She was a very loyal member of the Trump administration. She testified that it was her job to remind the American people of the policies, the victories within the Trump White House. She talked in the second part of the hearing about how hurtful it was when the former president tweeted about Mike Pence, that he did not have the courage to do what needed to be done in that moment. She said she took it personally, and we heard testimony that several other members of the Trump White House felt the same way in that moment. Those were the minutes, the hours, in fact, when they were urging the former president to do something about the mob over at the Capitol. She talked about walking down to the Oval Office to find her boss, Mark Meadows, who was in the dining room, the personal dining room right off of the Oval Office. We've talked about that room before, where the former president would often watch television. And Mark Meadows had gone to talk with the former president. She came to the doorway because I believe she said at the time Jim Jordan, member of Congress, was on the phone, wanted to talk to Mark Meadows. And she said when she passed the phone to her boss, Mark Meadows, she could then hear the other part of the conversation playing out in that personal dining room, the news of the chants that were taking place over at the Capitol, the Hang Mike Pence chants. She then testified before the American people about her disbelief and her sadness that the president did not defend his former vice president in that moment, did not act immediately to protect the vice president when it was clear the former president knew and was fully aware of the chance to hang Mike Pence. We'll get into what she said in the second half here in just a moment, but just the broader picture, the reaction coming in from members of the Republican Party and from members of Trump's inner circle. We got reaction from Mark Meadows' predecessor. Now, her boss was Mark Meadows, the former chief of staff, and the chief of staff before Meadows was Mick Mulvaney, and he tweeted out during testimony this afternoon, "My guess is that before this is over, we will be hearing testimony from Ornato, Engel, Meadows." Of course, Ornato, the deputy chief of staff, Meadows, Mark Meadows, Engel, the Secret Service agent tasked with protecting the president. He was the one she testified that the president essentially reached for in the Beast, which is the main car for the president, obviously, in the motorcade. Mulvaney goes on to say in that tweet you see there, he tweets, "This is explosive stuff. If Cassidy is making this up, they will need to say that. If she isn't, they will have to corroborate." And he goes on to write, and this is the key line of the tweet that will make news beyond us right here. He wrote, "I know her. I don't think she's lying." I want to bring in our chief Washington correspondent, Jonathan Karl. John, the weight of this testimony today.
Just absolutely incredible, David. 25 years old again, Cassidy Hutchinson, having the courage to come forward and do what so few inside the Trump White House have been willing to do, come out publicly, freely, and to tell the truth about what they witnessed. And the Mick Mulvaney there raises a very good question. Pat Cipollone is another name I would mention. We heard his name invoked quite a few times. He's the White House counsel. As White House counsel, you have a very good claim on executive privilege. But these are extraordinary circumstances. Isn't it time for Pat Cipollone to come forward and tell in his words what he witnessed on that day, the way John Dean, who was also the White House counsel, did during the Watergate hearings when he told the truth about his interactions with Richard Nixon. The two Secret Service agents, Robert Engel, the lead agent on President Trump, Tony Ornato, who was he was a Secret Service agent. He took leave to be the deputy chief of staff. Now he is again a Secret Service agent. Now there is a great tradition of Secret Service agents, keeping to themselves about this for obvious reasons. But again, these are extraordinary times. They were witness to extraordinary events. Will they come forward and will they tell their story about what they saw? This was by far, David, the biggest and most consequential of these January 6th hearings. And as you know, we've witnessed before this 5 very big and consequential hearings. This was at another level.
That's the big picture view. And John, I want to ask you about one key piece of testimony in this second half, and we'll dissect it all a little later on World News Tonight. But in the meantime, John, you heard this. Cassidy Hutchinson describing after she had gone to the personal dining room off of the Oval, heard that the former president was aware of these chants to hang Mike Pence. This was not long after that. She was back near her office, her post, just outside Mark Meadows' office. White House counsel comes down the hallway, says to Mark Meadows, Mark, we need to do something here. They're literally calling for the vice president to be blank hung. Mark had responded something to the effect of, well, you heard him, Pat, referring to the former president, President Trump. He thinks Mike deserves it. He doesn't think they're doing anything wrong.
And David, there was more even beyond that when they, the people around, Pat Cipollone and others around the president said he had to come out and do another statement on January 7th, the day after the attack, to finally do what he had failed to do on January 6th, which is to condemn the attack. She characterized Donald Trump's view at this point was that the rioters themselves, those that attacked the building, didn't do anything wrong. The only person that did something wrong on that day was Mike Pence. And then the committee mentioned something that still to this day blows me away, an interview that I had with Donald Trump about 6 weeks after he left the White House, where I asked him about those hang Mike Pence chants. And even then, he refused to condemn the people calling for his vice president's execution, saying it's common sense. How can you pass on a fraudulent vote? In other words, he was defending, explaining, rationalizing the chants of the people that were saying hang Mike Pence.
We remember that conversation well, John, the audio from that conversation, the interview you had with the former president after he left office. John Carl, our thanks to you. I want to bring in Mary Bruce over at the White House, covered Congress extensively during the Trump administration. Mary, how much pressure now on these former members of Trump's inner circle to testify, to give their version of this, to somehow either say what Cassidy Hutchinson said today was not the truth, or to acknowledge that she has described accurately what played out in those final hours?
Yeah, the big question, David, is whether this is going to be a turning point. And you heard the chairman there raising this question, whether her testimony will encourage others, whether it will jog their memory or encourage them to come forth now and be willing to speak more publicly. That's the big question. But the pressure still remains that these members of Congress, especially who have been very close with the Trump camp, with the former president, there is still a lot of pressure on them not to break with Donald Trump. Donald Trump is still, for all intents and purposes, the leader of the Republican Party, and he has a huge sway and power over the Republican Party. And whether or not this testimony will impact that remains to be seen. And David, we should say we are also hearing from Donald Trump. It seems he has been paying rather close attention today.
Yes, he said he did not know Cassidy Hutchinson, but Mary, you know the inner workings of the White House very well. They were effective, the committee, in putting up that map of the West Wing, showing it's just a few steps from literally where Cassidy Hutchinson sat outside Mark Meadows' office to get to the Oval. There you see what they had prepped for the American people today. Difficult to believe that the former president knew little about her or knew little of her.
That would be almost impossible. I mean, given I can tell you I'm right outside the West Wing right now, it is a very tight space given how closely she worked with Mark Meadows for many years and in the West Wing. The fact that Donald Trump didn't know her is very hard to believe. And he is putting out some messages responding to some of her testimony. He's saying he never complained about the crowd size that day at his rally, which she noted as part of her explanation for why he wanted them to not be to be able to wave going through the mags, despite the fact that they had some of them were found with weapons on them. He also says it's false to say that he tried to grab the steering wheel, as she recounted her understanding that he tried to grab the steering wheel as they were heading towards the Capitol because Donald Trump was so intent on getting up there that day. He said that's sick and fraudulent. The former president also saying it was ridiculous that he threw food. He was so frustrated with the Attorney General's response about the election results. But David, what he is not taking issue with are the claims that he knew that the crowd was going to be violent and that he did nothing to stop them.
Very interesting to point that out, Mary Bruce. Our thanks to you. And again, part of that message from the former president, I hardly know who this person, Cassidy Hutchinson, is. And again, Mary pointing out that she was just a couple of steps from the Oval. And not only that, she testified today that she was, in so many words, proud of her role, celebrating the victories, the policy achievements of the Trump administration, was a very, very loyal member of that team, loyal to Mark Meadows, to the former president, to Mike Pence. And she talked about, in particular, what it meant as the chants grew louder to hang Mike Pence, how she felt when the former president tweeted out that Mike Pence did not have the courage to do what was needed to be done, as so many around the former president were urging him to do something to stop what was playing out. I want to bring in Pierre Thomas, because the other piece of testimony today that stands out among so many key points that Cassidy Hutchinson shared with the American people that we had not heard before, but that one storyline, the narrative of the motorcade leaving that rally in the morning, that multiple law enforcement agencies had already told the former president's inner circle that this had begun to unfold, the chaos. It was unstable at the Capitol. They told the president, the Secret Service charged with protecting the president, the particular agent in the Beast with him, that's what they call, obviously, the vehicle that the president travels in, told him it is simply not safe to bring you up to the Capitol, Mr. President, in so many words. The president then, as described by Cassidy Hutchinson, lunging in so many words for that agent in a moment of rage, as she described it, inside the Beast. You know the Secret Service. You know, they've taken their hits through the years and their critiques, but one thing you cannot say is that they're not loyal to the presidents and first families that they serve.
Indeed, David, and I have reached out to a senior official who will not comment specifically on the altercation, but did say flatly that the president had wanted to go to Capitol Hill, and that the Secret Service rejected that request by the President of the United States. Now, David, as you point out, the Secret Service is loath to talk about the interpersonal and direct relationships with the White House and the president in particular. But in this case, I think Mr. Engel is going to be under incredible pressure to say whether this, in fact, did happen. And the other thing, David, to note is, as you pointed out, this notion that the security situation was getting worse and worse as time went on during the course of that morning and that day. You have law enforcement officials the day before the insurrection, January 6th, warning about the potential that the Capitol itself might be a target. David, the fact that so little was done to prepare for it, and David, we learned today that they had evidence of a man in a tree with an AR-15 assault-style rifle. Now, whether they found that person or not, that should have set off a series of very robust efforts to calm the crowd and get the president out of there.
Yeah, that was extraordinary. Congresswoman Cheney playing some of the messages that were coming into dispatch from members of law enforcement, witnessing what they said were at least a couple of instances involving AR-15 style assault rifles there at the Capitol as this was all beginning to unfold. And Pierre, one quick question to you before we move on, and we're about to wrap up our coverage here. But Pierre, I did want to ask you, because Congresswoman Liz Cheney at the very beginning of this hearing today methodically went over a number of agencies. Now, they face a real critique for not having been prepared or getting the information out to the American people well in advance, given the intelligence that something dangerous could happen on January 6th. But she did make the point today, pointing to evidence that they have obtained as the committee has been doing their work for nearly a year now, that multiple agencies warned this White House, from the Capitol Police to the Secret Service, in the days leading up to January 6th, that this could turn very dangerous.
David, one of the great mysteries about all of this is, given this intelligence that the Capitol Police had, the Secret Service had concern, other agencies were getting bits of information that the crowd that was going to be there to support Trump wasn't necessarily simply going to fight the counter-protesters, Antifa, if you will, but that they were there to perhaps target the Capitol itself. And the fact that so little was done, David, is one of the big mysteries that we still fully don't have all the answers to.
Yeah, questions about why nothing was done, and questions now for Trump's inner circle now that there's been testimony before the American people that they at least had been told. If the American people didn't know about it, certainly the former White House did know of the intelligence from multiple agencies. Our thanks to you, Pierre. Two more questions before we go. Sarah Isgur, who we talked to during the break, the recess before, I want to come back to her, a former spokesperson with the Trump Department of Justice and obviously an ABC News contributor now. Sarah, I'm curious, when you read that Mick Mulvaney tweet as well, we reported it on the air that he said, my guess is that before this is over, we will be hearing testimony from Ornato, Engel, Meadows, members of Trump's inner circle in these final hours, because he says this is explosive stuff. I know her. I don't think she's lying. What do you make of what he tweeted? Do you agree with him that we should see others come forward now?
I absolutely think we'll see a lot of pressure for those folks to testify and either rebut what she said or corroborate it. Right now, everything is relying on Cassidy Hutchinson's credibility. We have no reason to question her at this point. And in fact, we're not seeing other Republicans or other members of Trump's inner circle rebut these claims. And so, yes, she carried herself off as a patriot with a lot of credibility. I think we will see more people come forward and corroborate what she said.
Our thanks to Sarah Isgur here with us this afternoon. Terry Moran, I want to come to you, senior national correspondent. Of course, Terry's covered multiple administrations in Washington. Big picture here, a couple of key things that we learned today, this moment in the beast, which we don't have to go back over, this tension with the Secret Service agent, but this notion that the president was aware of the violence, of the chaos beginning to unfold at the Capitol, and still very much wanted to go to the Capitol. Mark Meadows had written that this was, metaphorically speaking, the president said, I'll be there with you. In a sense, I support what you're headed there to do, the message you want to send. Today we learned before the American people from multiple pieces of evidence that were displayed that the president did want to go. And not only that, he was in the motorcade and became enraged when the Secret Service told him that he simply couldn't because of security reasons. That is also a profound development here today from the committee.
It is, David. It's astonishing. It's shocking. It's one of the most shocking scenes in the history of the American presidency, and it's checkable. It's a checkable fact. There were other people in that car. The testimony of Cassidy Hutchinson is a moment in American history. She takes the American people into the inner circle directly, an eyewitness, a participant in discussions on the day the Capitol was attacked and in the days leading up to it. And one of the details that you just mentioned, Donald Trump was planning that day to go to Capitol Hill against what his own White House counsel was advising, because for a president who had lost the election as certified by the 50 sovereign states of this country to basically go to the Capitol to rally or demand the presidency be awarded to him, to say nothing of inciting what he knew was an armed crowd. They won't hurt me, he said. It's just almost incredible. I think one of the things that today did was, for a lot of Americans who thought about January 6th, they were sad, they were disgusted by it. They thought, well, that's chaos. That's Trump's chaos. Yeah, people got out of hand. He was incompetent if he was trying to stage a coup. What we heard today from Cassidy Hutchinson from inside that inner circle is that this was a direction that he was determined to go. Not just physically, but arranging and organizing and orchestrating a mob to attack the Capitol so he could seize the power that the 50 sovereign states had given to Joe Biden, the American people had given to Joe Biden. It is a shocking day in American history.
Yeah, we're all students of history here. And Terry, when you hear the description of a former president reaching for the steering wheel in the motorcade, have you ever heard of anything like that before?
I'm old enough to remember Watergate. I actually remember the testimony of John Dean and the way the country reacted to that being taken into the Nixon inner circle. But really, and Nixon was, coming apart at the seams at the end of his presidency. He was drinking a lot, praying with Henry Kissinger in ways that Kissinger thought was unhinged. But nothing like this can I remember. We have had presidents who've had tempers. We've had all kinds of men of different characters in the presidency. Good characters, lousy characters. There's something mad in what we heard in the description of Donald Trump today. Something deeply dangerous morally and psychologically.
Terry Moran watching the hearings with us here today. Terry, thank you. And one last question before we send this back to regular programming. John Carl, Chief Washington Correspondent, of course, watching this every step of the way with us. John, you heard Congresswoman Liz Cheney, Vice Chair of the committee there at the end, talk about the intimidation, the pressure put on these witnesses. There have been so few willing to come forward today, and we've talked about this at length here this afternoon, that Cassidy Hutchinson is young. She had and likely still has a very bright future ahead of her, but a lot is at stake in coming forward today. She testified how loyal she was to the Trump administration, how proud she was of the policies, of the victories, the achievements they had, and how personally hurt she was, particularly in those moments of hang Mike Pence, that the former president wasn't doing more to stop what was playing out in Washington, and that she became scared was the word I believe she used after that conversation with Rudy Giuliani on an evening a couple of days prior to January 6th. But when you see what Liz Cheney put up there before the American people, and these were different examples from a wide array of witnesses, phone calls, communications with them from other members close to the former president, essentially telling them, putting pressure on them, be careful, if you will.
There was a clear effort, according to Liz Cheney, to intimidate previous witnesses before this committee in those depositions. The language, frankly, sounding like it's straight out of a mafia intimidation campaign, warning those who are testifying that the former president, reads transcripts. You don't want to be off Team Trump. Liz Cheney did not mention which witnesses received these threats. She said there were several of them, and she said the committee would be investigating them. Clearly an effort to try to tamper with these witnesses, that in and of itself a crime. David. So this is something they're looking into, and it's a reason why this hearing happened on such short notice and with such secrecy. They were really worried that there would be an effort to get to Cassidy Hutchinson to try to intimidate her and convince her not to testify. Fortunately, for all of us who got to see what she saw on January 6th, that did not happen.
Jonathan Karl. Live at the Capitol there for us again today. John, thank you. Our coverage will continue on ABC News Live, of course, abcnews.com as well. I'll be back with the entire team for World News Tonight, and I thank John, Terry, Pierre, Mary, Sarah Isger as well for our coverage here this afternoon. I'm David Muir in New York. We'll see you for World News Tonight. Good day.
This has been a special report from ABC News.
Hi everyone, George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel, and don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.